Hey guys, I have another Canadian with me, and I always love that. And the coolest thing about her is that she's actually a voice actor, and I'm like, how cool is that? And she's a podcast host of audio branding. And I can't remember, Jody, if I saw you on someone else's podcast, but I just like reached out and I'm like, I think you would make the coolest guest. So meet Jody Krangle and welcome to my show.
Thanks so much. Hello. Oh, hi there.
I know. Again, I know we had such a good chat previously. And like you live like an hour away from me. I'm like, what?
Yeah. Yeah.
So bizarre. I'm actually passing through by your town later today as I meet
Oh,
someone for dinner. So I'll wave as I drive through.
okay. Okay. I will expect a wave.
Awesome. And I love like there is the aspect of podcasting where it's like how to use your voice, your intonation, how you speak, and all that kind of stuff. But when
Hmm.
I happen to see your podcast on audio branding, it just kind of got my brain going. Like, obviously, I know branding, like your colors, your logos, your website, but I never really stopped and thought about audio branding. So can you kind of share what that is and what that means?
Well, your experience is not uncommon in that a lot of people really don't pay attention to sound. It's kind of that
Yeah.
thing that we take for granted. And I think it's really something we should be taking into account because it's very important to our
Yeah.
lives. And it would be it really will help psychologically. It helps to pay attention to it in whatever you're doing and whatever you're producing. So
Yeah. It
podcasting
is one
is,
of our senses, right? Like
well,
the hearing.
definitely. Yeah, yeah. It is a very big part of, for instance, podcasting.
Mhm.
So, the sound is very important. So, audio branding really encompasses a whole bunch of different things. And I'm going to give you the definition that the International Sound Awards define it
Oh,
as.
okay.
So, they say that audio branding is a brand sound that represents the identity and values of a brand in a distinctive manner.
Hmm.
The audio logo, branded functional sounds, brand music, or the brand voice are characteristic elements of audio branding. So it's there's lots of stuff under that umbrella, let's say.
Yeah. Can you give some
Yeah.
examples just to kind of like paint a picture? Like, does Coke have audio branding? Does
Oh,
like,
totally.
do you know what I
Totally
mean?
they
Like,
do.
or
Yeah,
is
yeah.
it jingles or like a certain person's voice that is like the voiceover that you recognize?
It's all of that.
Okay.
That's the thing, right? That's why I'm saying it's a broad umbrella
True.
of things, right? So there's a large spectrum of things, like the Intel da 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 da, like that's their Sonic logo,
Ooh,
right?
right.
So McDonald's has the I'm loving it thing, and there's all sorts of different ones out there. The Affleck duck for a long time was like really
Yes.
audio branding. I mean, that's what that is. So, yeah, like State Farm has their jingle, and then the calming voice of the representative, and like that kind of stuff all encompasses everything that they put out there as far as sound is concerned. But it works in concert with their visual branding and with
Mm,
everything else that they have out there. So when the two work together, it really is kind of gold for a company. And the thing about this is that it takes a while for it to actually take
true.
because, yeah, you got to hear it many times. It has to be used consistently and you need to hear it repetitiously because the more often you hear it, the more you're going to associate with that brand, that sound, and the more distinct it becomes in your head. So I don't know about you, but I can remember jingles from 25 years ago. Like they
Yes,
stick in your head, right?
they do. And the
And
little songs. And yeah.
yes, yeah. So that's the power of sound. It really is a huge power, and we need to use it to our advantage in whatever we're doing. And I think that people who don't pay attention to it are kind of doing themselves a disservice.
Hmm, good to know. And so when it comes to podcasters, like what comes to my mind is the intro music, right? That like blends in. So can you like, is there anything else that like how would we weave audio branding into our podcast?
Well, a lot of people will look on music or license-free music directories to find the music that they're going to use on their intro and outro for their podcast. So you can definitely start there. I think that's a great idea. Think about who your audience is and what your personality is and where those two meet in the middle, and find a piece of music that you like, but you think your audience will also like. So it's kind of a combination of those two things, because it really is, we're doing this for our audience, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we're doing this for other people. So you're hoping that they're going to listen, appeal to them by giving them music you think they'd like, and that they would respond to, that they would find hits them where they, where they live, where
it feels, yeah,
hits them in the heart. Exactly. Yeah. And music does that. It totally does that. But our voices can do that too. So the voice that you use on your intro and outro can also evoke whatever feeling you are wanting for your podcast. And that can be your own voice. I'm not saying you have to get someone professional to do it. I mean, technically, if you're doing a podcast on a regular basis and have been for a while, you're a professional.
Yeah.
I mean, your own podcast really well. And if that's the case, then definitely, especially if you are your own branding, definitely.
Yeah, like I'm the voice, literally the voice behind the business.
Exactly. Yeah. But there are a lot of business branded podcasts out there, pardon me, that really need a more polished touch, I guess, just to make people pay attention. And also, when you're having someone else introduce you, you can have that person say nice things about you, where it's really hard for you to say that about yourself, right? So if you really want to crow about your accomplishments and stuff like that, it's probably better to get someone else to do your introduction.
I know. I have a funny story though. So I had like a voiceover from Fiverr or whatever, and it was kind of like a lot of people I feel did that years ago with their podcast, but it was a man's voice and it was very radio like, and I was just like, I did it because I sort of felt like I had to. And then after a while it just grated with me, and I was like, it's so not me. Like, I'm not that manly, powerful voice kind of vibe. Like, I may be loud and I may talk a lot, but yeah, it just felt like it was a disconnect.
Sure. Yeah. And let me just say that not every voice actor is like that.
No, I know. Totally.
That, you don't have to put on a voice to be a voice actor. In fact, nowadays it's actually a detriment to do that, because people's BSometers are so high these days. So you really have to sound like a real person. So when I do an intro or an outro for someone's podcast, I'm a real person.
Yeah.
I'm not putting on a voice of some kind. I'm just telling it like it is, and with varying degrees of excitement, really.
Yes.
The idea is to care about what you're saying, but you don't have to put on a voice and, be someone you're not to do that.
Or be
in fact, it's being more you is what it is.
You're not a circus announcer. You're
exactly. Yeah. 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 And I work in the areas of commercial and corporate narration specifically.
Yeah.
So those areas are things I really need to be very conscious of that with.
Because you still need to come across as authentic and like a person that someone can relate to. And I also had a client and we were working on a podcast, and she wanted to do, I can't remember if it was like not Meatloaf or AC/DC, but it was like that kind of music.
Yeah.
And the podcast, I'm like, oh man, like I was like, you may like that music, but your music has to marry like your podcast and the type of people that you're connecting with and what have you. And
what type of podcast was it?
What's that?
What type of podcast was it?
It had to do with lawyers.
Really? AC/DC for lawyers?
I know it was very, but I guess it was like, but that's the thing where it comes like, it made me
maybe
think
that's her
about
clientele
differently, right?
Yeah.
Like, oh, you like it personally.
Yeah.
But you can't have that for your podcast.
It would depend on who her clients were.
Yeah.
If her clients were rock stars,
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And you rocking out. Yeah, for sure.
Sure. Yeah. It depends on who you want to reach, you know.
Yeah.
If you're after like the, upper levels of management and stuff like that, like you're I don't think they're going to connect with that. That would be
I
harder.
know. But it really made me think
Yeah.
about like how I'm coaching my clients and what have you. Because to me, I just feel like, oh, it just comes naturally. But it's like you really need to be intentional and strategic with the sounds and what you're doing with your podcast for sure.
Definitely. Yeah. And it's marketing 101 to know your avatar, right?
Yeah.
So if you know your avatar, then that's who you're catering to. But at the same time, you don't want to do something that's completely disparate from who you are.
Yeah.
So it's a melding of the two, really, especially when it comes to audio.
And what I love is melody loops. I've used that before. I like how you can organize it or categorize or find sound that relates to moods. So if something is like serious or upbeat or fun or happy or jazzy or like you can narrow down. And to me, it's like I always think in my head, okay, what is the mood? Are you trying to aspire people? Are you trying to like connect? Are you trying to like, energize them, or like it's a workout show you're doing? Or yeah, like there's, to me, sound I associate with mood.
Yes. Yeah, very much so. And you can really interpret the look of your website that way. Look of what the website, the look of
Mm,
your company logo, the colors that you use, anything in your visual branding, you can also associate with a mood. And so
true.
once you know that mood, then you just carry through with that mood with your audio.
Yeah. So how do you help people kind of brand their podcasts or their audio or whatever it is that they're working on? Like, is there a process, or do you like literally figure out what they do and who their avatar is?
Well, personally, I'm a voice actor, and that's what I
Yeah.
do. But I can certainly point people in the direction of audio branding companies that do this all day, every day. That's not actually something that I do for
Right,
people.
right.
But yeah, I mean, I've talked to people on the podcast who are from all over the world. So there's so many companies out there that do such good work. And it's such a new branch of marketing
Very.
and yeah, advertising and that kind of thing. It's really coming into its own, I think, now, especially after we were all stuck at home, basically listening. That's what we were at home
Yeah.
doing. We were listening. And yes, there was some Zoom and there was some video involved, and a lot of that is still out there as well. But I think we all experienced video fatigue, and
Hmm.
audio isn't quite on the end of that. We haven't gotten fatigue from audio yet.
I think
So I
because it
think
lends itself to so much flexibility. Like you can listen to it
exactly.
while you're doing other things.
Yes, and that's exactly why I think it fits into our busy lives, because you can do it while you're folding the laundry or commuting to work, or
Yeah.
you can listen to a podcast while you're out on a walk, and you can do other things while you're listening. You can just have earbuds in and do whatever you want to do. So, yeah, I think it does lend itself very well into our lives, and we've taken we've really taken it for granted in the last little while, but I think
Mhm.
it's starting to become more obvious and out front
Yeah,
in the last few years.
I
Yeah.
agree. So how can we weave, like, how do we create an audio sound brand? Are there certain elements that we need to like have a checklist or think about?
Well, every audio branding company will have a different way of doing this. They all
True.
have their own processes. So it depends on if you're looking for specifically music or if you're looking for a whole broad spectrum of things like company sounds, an audio logo, uh, music that you want to play on a commercial, or something you want on your website. You want to follow through with all of this. I will say that it is an investment up front, but it can save you a lot of money because you have, like you would have let's say, an intranet where you would share with the whole company what your logos look like, what your colors are, what fonts they should use on all the pages that they put out, or what the advertising in print magazines should look like, and all of this stuff, right? Print magazines, I mean, I don't know how many people have those anymore, but yeah, anyway, anything, yeah, nice to have something in your hand, you know? But anything you're putting out there has a set way that it's supposed to look. And there's nothing that says that you can't, and I think you should, have also the audio that you would use for anything that you would put out there that needs audio. So once you have a piece of music written for you, you can modify that piece of music to fit just about any scenario. Small advertisements, longer videos on your website, advertisements for pre-rolls on YouTube or anything you're doing, the intro and outro for a podcast, the intro and outro in a Clubhouse room or a Twitter Spaces room, right? The on hold music that you're going to use, that people are, that's often the first time they come across your branding is that audio medium. And they're likely upset when they're calling you then. So, you want to put a good impression out there when they're waiting on the phone, right?
That's a great idea, to use the audio in different elements. So it is weaving in to all the other different elements of your marketing. That's a great idea. Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, it's all a comprehensive whole to give people an idea of who you are in audio format. And it hits us a lot harder and a lot faster than the visual.
I never thought of that.
It's that sense that reaches right into our heart. Think about the films that you watch. Like I'm not a huge horror film fan, so if I really don't want to be scared, I'll turn off the music. I'll turn off the sound. Because I can watch whatever's going on with no problem, but I'll care about it if I'm hearing the music and the sound, right? So if you turn off, so watch a movie and then turn off the sound, and you'll get what's going on. You just won't care.
That is a great way of putting it. That's so true, because it changes how you feel about, and also creates that anticipation, right?
Yes, the music definitely does that. Yeah. So without that music to tell you that this is scary.
Yeah.
Right?
Something bad's coming up.
Yeah.
I love that. So what are some tips that you would give people to when they're creating their intro or outro so that they do consider that sound branding element?
Well, like I was saying, it's a good idea to pay attention to what you like, but also what you think your audience is going to like, the people who are listening to you, who you think might want your product or service, or who would be interested in your podcast. I would say that you don't want it to be too long. So don't waste people's time. Probably, I would say 30 seconds or less is probably, you could probably get away with a minute, but I think any longer than that, and you're really pushing it. And in that, you want to give people an idea quickly of what they're likely to hear. So in that intro, make sure that they understand what your podcast is about and what they're likely to experience by listening further. And if you have an intro after that for your guest or whatever, that's great, not a problem. But the intro and the outro may not change from podcast to podcast. They certainly could. I would say in your outro, you need to make sure that you have a call to action of some kind.
Agreed.
And to let people know maybe that there is another part coming, if there's 2 parts to the episode, or let people know how they can sign up for a newsletter, or if you have any promotions going on, that's probably the place to put it. And, you could mention that in front too, in the intro part, not in the podcast intro, but in the intro to the guest.
Yeah.
Right. So that it's part of the podcast as opposed to keeping them from hearing the podcast.
Yes.
Right. There's so many different ways to do this, and I know lots of people do it differently. So that's just my basics for things that might help you get more of an audience.
Now, For you as a voice actor, clearly you pay attention to how people are saying things versus just what they're saying. Um, are there any tips as a podcast host or guest of things that they can do to sound more professional or communicate more effectively, or mistakes that you've seen that
I think
probably
that,
grate you when you listen to podcasts?
yeah, yeah. You know what? It can be hard, I think, for people who aren't trained in how to speak. Sometimes doing this podcasting thing can become kind of a slog because it's difficult to know how to get your point across
Mhm.
and still sound interesting.
Yeah.
Right. So I would say that one of the first things to think about is not to be monotone. And you can help yourself not be monotone by using your hands.
Oh,
So
interesting.
if you talk with your hands a little bit, that
Yeah.
can make things a little more musical, I guess, almost.
Yeah.
But you don't want it to be sing-songy. You just want to be expressing yourself.
Yeah.
And that's like a trick that every voice actor I know uses, because no one's seeing you in the booth when you're doing a
No.
job usually, right? So, but yeah, I'm gesticulating wildly all over the place when I'm doing that, because if you want to really make sure that someone knows you care about something, then that's a way to really get the passion out.
I love that.
And yeah, you want people to hear your passion. That's part of this, right?
Yeah.
So I would say don't worry about the ums and whatever. You can get rid of some of those in post if you really want to, but breathe. Remember to breathe, because a sigh, just letting out a breath. Like if you let out a breath, you can't be tense. It's impossible to be tense.
Mm.
So that just really helps. Just a couple of things.
And if you are nervous, I find you tend to like, you're tensed up, but also like you hold your breath.
Yeah, it's so true. And your shoulders go forward, right? Like you got to make sure your shoulders are not necessarily laid back, but that they're not like tense and your jaw isn't tense, all sorts of ways to keep yourself from being too nervous.
Do you listen to yourself a lot, like the playbacks, to kind of work out some of those tics or like see what areas you can improve?
I totally do. Yeah.
Yeah.
I kind of have to, because I check over every podcast that I do. So I want to make sure that every podcast I do is going to sound good, is going to be interesting for my audience. I choose a snippet of audio from somewhere inside the episode to put at the front of the episode.
Yeah.
In order to give people a lead in to what they're going to hear for the actual episode and give them a little teaser, right?
Totally.
So I have to listen to the whole podcast in order to get that
Yeah.
little snippet, which is good for me because I then know if there are any mistakes I need to take care of or anything like that. And yeah, it works out pretty well. So yes, I do listen a lot. And I notice that I say and and like
doesn't?
a lot. Yeah, it happens. And I can't help it, but well, maybe I could
You're
help
human,
it. I don't
though.
know, but
You're not reading off
yeah.
of a script, right?
Exactly. I'm me. I'm just being me. That's, people can listen or not. It's up to them.
I know. I think sometimes people want to practice so much that it feels rehearsed. It's like, to me, I'm like, it's okay to not be perfect. Yes, you want to improve, and yes, you don't want to be monotone or like scratchy voice or whatever it may be, but you do want to connect with humans, and it's okay to flub here and there.
Yeah, we can be human. In fact, that's part of why people listen to podcasts, I think, because they want to hear us be human.
Yeah.
I don't think there's
Any
anything wrong
lessons
with
from
that.
your podcast? Like, so do you feel like you've done any improvements or just things that you've picked up from obviously doing your own podcast?
Oh yeah. Interviewing techniques are basically my big thing that I listen for. And a lot of it has to do with active listening. And that's hard for a lot of us. It really is. It shouldn't be as hard because it should come naturally, right? It should be something we do all the time, but
Yeah.
no, we don't. So, yeah, definitely slowing down, listening to what my guest is saying, commenting on it if I think that there's a place where my listeners might not understand what we're talking about, explaining, because I'm the fly on the wall. I'm the layperson, right? I'm talking to people who are experts, but I'm not necessarily the expert in that field. I know I'm not the expert in that field. So I want to help interpret it for the people who are listening. And that's my job. My job is to get them the information that they need to act on and make sure they understand the world of sound a little better. And I learn every time I interview someone.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, there's always room for improvement. And sometimes, and that's one thing I've learned, A, is to talk in sound bites, but also like when to shut up.
That's so hard.
It can be.
It shouldn't be that hard. But yeah, like I was saying, it is. It can be hard.
Yeah. This has been super helpful. I love just giving ideas of how to improve a podcast, but on a different layer. Like we think about the words and the interviewing style and the content, but we don't always think about the sound and that feel and that kind of how that weaves and ties into your branding. I think it's really important.
Yeah, it definitely is. And I think that if you pay attention to that, your audience, the people that listen to you, will really appreciate it. And
Yeah.
you'll see a big uptick in listeners, I think, because that's just something that we appreciate as listeners.
Yeah. Agreed. Now, how can people find you? And if I remember correctly, you have a free resource that you can share, which
Mhm.
I always love sharing extra resources for people.
Sure. I am at voiceoversandvocals.com if anyone has a question. The podcast is at audiobrandingpodcast.com. And if you're interested, we do have Clubhouse discussions
Yes.
on a regular basis on Wednesdays at 2 p.m. Eastern in the club, which is called the Power of Sound. And I have a Facebook group for that as well, if people are interested in getting on that. And there's a email newsletter off of the main podcasting page if they're interested. As far as the thing that I'm offering, I have a PDF on coming up with a comprehensive audio branding strategy.
Perfect.
So yeah, if you go to voiceoversandvocals.com/audio-branding-strategy, that will take you to that.
Perfect. And
And
I'll have the links in the show notes.
yeah, that'll make it easier.
Yeah. Perfect.
Yeah.
And yeah, I appreciate you so much. Thank you for coming on and
Thank
chatting
you for
about
having
sound so we
me.
can think about it in a new way and improve.
I appreciate you having me on the show. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah. All right.